Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Not bad. Just one glitch. I was thinking back there, one glitch and of course it has to be technical. It has to be, when we rely on technology, it has to be, technical. But I thought that, if we did this more often, we'd be better at it. I would like to get so good at it, that there are no glitches because we remember everything, but it is just too few and far between. So we don't pray for the harvest. The harvest is there. We pray for workers to go into the harvest. So I'd love for us to be so good at baptizing the whole thing, the whole service, that we would never have any glitches. But so when Daniel describes Rome in his visions, the metal is iron in the statue in chapter 2, and then by chapter 7, it's a beast that he can't describe. Every other beast, every other kingdom, he can describe it. This one he can't describe. And of course, it began with a myth of these twins, Romulus and Remus, supposedly raised by wolves on the banks of the Tiber River, and that little village that they lived in grew up to soon create an empire that made the Mediterranean Sea a Roman lake. A power like we've never seen before, and probably will never ever see again. It was a different method that they had. Most kingdoms, say even later kingdoms like Genghis Khan, what they would do is they would go in and they would destroy it. They would go in, they'd kill everybody and destroy it, and then have nothing. Rome thought that was a waste of resources. So what Rome did was that they would go in with little or minimal conflict and just make it their own. Put their name on everything. Just make it their own. Now belongs to us. And when it came to religion, they pretty much allowed you to practice your religion pretty much any way that you wanted to. All they required were two things: loyalty to the emperor, and if you didn't squirrel away too much, pay your taxes. And then that was it. You were pretty much allowed to do what you did. Now, every now and then, you'd be made an example of. And that method worked great, except when you get to this tiny little area called Palestine. Now, Palestine is an anachronistic term. It's not known as Palestine back then. Palestine doesn't come until well after 70 AD. But that area that we know is Israel, that we would call the Holy Land today, that tiny little area no bigger than Vermont and New Hampshire together, Margaret. We need Vermont and New Hampshire together, and you pretty much have Palestine. You pretty much have Israel. Because in that area, there was I don't know. Yeah, I guess so. It's a smart TV, so it's no longer it's smarter than us. It opened up YouTube on its own, so it was almost like let me see. Let's just try one more time. No, yeah, let's just show it up. Just hope it's not broken. It belongs to King's Church. So anyway, because this one little area believed that their taxes, everything, including their taxes and their loyalty, belonged to this one God. Everywhere else in the world, there were dozens of gods and pantheons and stuff. And when the Roman Senate found out that they believed in one God, they laughed at them. They said, "Oh man, where did you find this backwater people?" And in an area that small, it took 9 garrisoned cities to keep the peace in that place. You know how many Roman cities it took to keep the peace in Egypt? 2. But in Israel, a place like that, rebellion is always on the other side of the horizon. Rebellion is just right over there like that. 9 garrison cities, all under the control of one procurator or one governor, Pontius Pilate, by Jesus' day. So I often wondered, what kind of man would it take to govern this place? What kind of man do you send to a place like this that is constantly being threatened with rebellion? What kind of man is this? He's either got to be very, very good at what he does, extremely good at what he does, extremely good at quelling rebellion. In other words, showing his power and finding that balance in between. Either that, or he's lousy at his job and he's being sent there as punishment. Either way, Israel gets it in the teeth, don't they? Because the guy that does his job well, he'll do it well by oppressing them, or the guy that does his job lousy, he wants to get back in the graces of the emperor because he knows he's been exiled to this backwater swamp of a place. Either way, Israel gets it in the teeth. So we're introduced today to Caiaphas, and you got to wonder why in this chapter right here, this chapter of these, I told you that there's three people who asked if Jesus was the Messiah, that these three people, Jesus just came right out and told them that he was. Did you ever know that the third person would have been this Roman governor, this pagan Roman governor? Because it was. So we begin in John, in the narrative in John. All four Gospels have the narrative of Jesus' trial before Pilate, but we're going to spend most of the time in John today. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. So when he was arrested in Gethsemane, he was taken to the high priest first, and he went through that trial first. Actually, two of them. Two high priests in Jesus' day. Don't have time to talk about it. Actually, we will in a couple weeks. But they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to what? As to avoid becoming unclean, because guess what day it is? It's the day before Passover, okay? So they don't want to become unclean. They won't be able to partake in Israel's holiest of feasts. So they're not going to step across the threshold of a Gentile, or that would make them unclean. So what's interesting is that as opposed to the other trials, Jesus is in there alone with Pilate. Whereas before he was with about half of the Sanhedrin. So he's by himself with this guy. So if you think about it, it sounds familiar, doesn't it? He was alone with the woman at the well. He had some alone time with the man born blind. He gets to be alone with Pilate and no one else around. Okay? They want to be able to eat the Passover. Okay? So this is our man here. And I stay in the Gospel of John because Pilate has much more of a central role in the Gospel of John than he does in other places. We know more about him. And again, that may attribute to John living more years than everyone else before he writes his gospel. He may have learned more about Pilate, but I would imagine that John has thought a lot about this day. A lot about this day over the next 70 years of his life. And there's some things that he understands that, of course, he didn't understand that night of what was happening and what was going down. So we get more detail in John. I will tell you that one thing history tells us about Pilate is that he's definitely, by this day, by this night, he is in a weak political position in relation to these Jewish leaders. He's blundered several times up until now. In other words, he's one of those guys that maybe he was good, but he has blundered. He has made some big mistakes up until now. So he is walking on thin ice with these Jewish leaders, and he's walking on thin ice with the emperor. You don't want to be on thin ice with the emperor. Because if he blows this, when you get on thin ice with the emperor and you blow it, you don't go to the governor's retirement home. There is no governor's retirement home. You get my drift, right? That's Rome. So this would make him vulnerable to one thing. And a theme that you may have here that you may not have thought about when you think about Pilate during this entire scene, but he's vulnerable to one thing, and that's blackmail. And they try. These leaders will try. We'll talk about it right here. So verse 29, Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation to bring against this man?" Notice, they're outside, they won't go in. Jesus is in his room. Maybe he came in, they've introduced themselves, okay? And he says, "Hang on just a second. I want to go find out why they brought you to me," okay? What has this man done? What has he done? And they answered what? If this man were not a criminal, he would not have handed him over to you. Pilate wants the basic charge, okay? He wants to show that he's not just going to rubber stamp whatever the leaders wanted, something they were hoping for, by the way. They're hoping that he'll just believe them. But he knows these guys. He knows these guys. Their reply is sarcastic, isn't it? They think they're in charge here. He's a criminal. That's his charge. He's a criminal. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Of course. Okay? Take him. Do whatever you want. All right? It's vague, and it's vague on purpose. They can't tell Pilate the true charge. See, they want him hung as a false prophet. Pilate doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about their religion. I told you before, Rome doesn't care about your religion. In fact, it just muddies the waters when it comes to legal matters. One thing about Pilate, though, is that he's very fair, and before he does anything, he makes sure he's standing on solid legal ground. Pilate wouldn't care if he's a false prophet, and he certainly would not put Jesus to death for it. They need Pilate to do that. That's why he's here. It's condescending, too. He's a criminal. He's a criminal. It's condescending. It proves that Pilate has to be in trouble. They wouldn't be this condescending with him. A Roman governor wouldn't take that. They'd arrest them for contempt. And he does, kind of. He smacks it right back at them. He says, okay, take him yourselves. You say he's a criminal? Go take him to your own courts. Okay? According to your law, he says. Take him according to your law. You know what he just said, right? Get smart with me, you jerks. Get out of here. Okay? I've had it. You wanted me for something, you're not going to get it now. Take him and judge him according to your law, your religious law. I don't care about any of that. Go ahead. You would think this is exactly what they wanted, but no, because they replied, the Jews replied, we're not what? We're not permitted to put anyone to death. Now, this is the first time that Pilate understands that whatever he did, they want what? They want death. Actually, this is disputed right here. Okay? About half historians say that Israel did have authority to put people to death. The Torah certainly gave them permission to do so within Israel. But the dispute is whether or not Rome would allow you to do that. See, when Rome came in and took over, they kept you under a pretty, it may go against what I was saying before, but they kept you a pretty tight rein legally. So if you were going to be killing people, Rome would need to know why. So the argument is, did they allow them to put them to death? I would say yes. I lean towards yes. As long as they could prove that they broke an actual law, or if they were religious laws, that they could put them to death, okay? Why won't they just go ahead and do it? Because the Bible only allowed Israel certain types of executions that's mentioned: burning, beheading, and stoning. See, but what John tells us is next is that it says Jesus. I'm sorry, I didn't put verse 32 up there. This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. And Mike just read us the kind of death he was to die. When the Son of Man is what? Is lifted up. It's describing what? Crucifixion. That Israel had no legal right to do. They have to have Pilate do this for him. Okay? And why do they want to do that? Okay? Because this is what it says about crucifixions, what Deuteronomy says about crucifixion. His corpse must not remain all night upon the tree. You shall bury him that day, for anyone hung on a tree is what? Is under God's curse. Anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. There's no way he could be cursed by God and be anointed by God at the same time. Remember, his title is Messiah, the anointed one of God. There's absolutely no way that he could be cursed and blessed. You understand? Now you know why they want it. Because they've heard him preach. They've heard him preach this, the very death that he would die. He told his disciples that not only would he die, he'd be resurrected, which would prove that he was of God. They not only want him dead, they want to make sure that nobody could ever believe that he was Messiah again. Because God's not going to let his anointed be hung. He's not going to let his anointed be cursed. Now you know why Israel brings him to Pilate and didn't just kill him themselves. Crucifixion was reserved only for Roman sedition. This was a crime against the emperor. You committed a crime. Remember, I told you all they asked for was your loyalty to the emperor? You commit a crime against the emperor, crucifixion was for you. Why? Because it isn't about death with crucifixion. It's not about death at all. It's about abject humiliation. This is what happens. They'd throw you up there, it'd probably take you a month to die from crucifixion. They'd feed them. They'd give them water and food to keep them alive as long as possible. In this abject, horrible torture of trying to breathe and not being able to breathe and trying to do so. This just horrible, miserable way to die. But the longer you were up there, the more of an example you were. This is what happens when you mess with Rome. So this is why they need him. It's ingenious, by the way. And they've been working on it for a while. I think John chapter 8 was the first time that the Sanhedrin, that the guys got together and said, you know what, we got to eliminate this guy. So it's been about 10 chapters ago that they've been putting this plan into motion. They're relying on Pilate, but Pilate, he's not so easily manipulated. The outcome's going to be the same. But this ability for Pilate not to be manipulated just makes him a fascinating character, and it sets up what we want to learn about him today. This conversation that he has with the God of gods, this conversation that he has with God walking in a human body, the one who has the power to kill him, the one who has the power to execute him. This conversation is absolutely fascinating. Jesus is even able to become more personable to him. He's not one of these irritating, Jewish cases that just, drives Pilate nuts is the reason why he doesn't want to be here. He becomes more personable with Jesus. Jesus breaks through something, all on this night. Jesus is able to do that. Pilate enters the headquarters again, summons Jesus, and asks him what? Are you the king of the Jews? Wow. Just jumps right in, right? Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus has, the leaders have formulated these charges. Now that they've showed their hand that they want him put to death, then Pilate says, okay, the only reason we put anybody to death is a rival king, somebody who's rivaling the emperor. So they tipped their hand, and they probably tipped it too early. You know why? This guy doesn't look like a king. Pilate already knows that he isn't. In fact, you could almost read this as sarcasm. Are you really the king of the Jews? Are you the king of these irritating backwater people that I am so sick of I could vomit? You lead them? Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus has a question for him. Do you ask this on your what? On your own? Have you observed this? Have you observed these charges? Or what? Did others tell you about me? You getting this firsthand, or are you getting it what? Jesus is casting the doubt that he knows is there. Right? Is Jesus there under true and not false pretense? This trial's a sham, isn't it? Is he guilty of what he's been charged of? No, in fact, he hasn't committed anything of what he's been charged of, right? So Jesus knows. He casts the doubt here. Did others tell you about me? You getting this secondhand from those guys? and Pilate knows all about those guys. So in a way, Jesus just kind of worked himself into Pilate's circle. Yeah, these guys, man. Pilate says, nope, it's not because they told me. This is a legal matter. I'm not a what? I'm not a Jew. It was your own people that brought you to me. This is not a religious problem. You're not here because of their religious accusation. I'm only here to find out if you've broken a law, if you've broken Roman law. That's the only reason I'm here. I'm not a Jew. They're the ones that handed me over to you. What'd you do? What have you done? He says. Because you're only here because of these leaders. Jesus said, these pesky people that you don't like, and they've handed me over to you. So Jesus answers that. He says, my kingdom is what? So Jesus just told him that he is a what? That he's a king. But my kingdom is not of what? It's not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is what? Is not from here. It's amazing. He just told him that he's a king. The one thing that could get him crucified, a rival king to the emperor. But Jesus says, yeah, I'm a king, but the emperor's got nothing to worry about because my kingdom is not of here. See, the kingdom Pilate would be concerned with would be the kingdom here. A rival king that would rival the emperor, that would rival Rome's occupation with Israel, that would rival his governorship. Jesus says, it's none of that. He even gives Pilate earthly evidence of it. And what is the earthly evidence that he gives? If I was fighting for an earthly kingdom, my earthly followers would be fighting. And I would have loved for him to tell the story of Peter trying to fight off a Roman cohort, 2,000 soldiers with one sword, and not getting anywhere near them, but slicing the ear off an unarmed slave. Nice shot, Peter. So it's the earthly evidence. Pilate knows what he says, though. You're what? So you are a king. Now he's got his attention. Now he has attention. And he makes Jesus, he just asks to make sure. And then, though, so you are a king. Jesus gives the one answer that he can't give here. Okay? He absolutely cannot give. Y'all remember what the answer is? You say that I'm a king. So there it was right there. You say correctly that I'm a king. So you are a king. He asks, are you a king? Are you a king of this world? Of this world to come, this other worldly king? So you are? Pilate asks him if he's what? If he's the Messiah. And Jesus comes right out and says, yeah, I am. But it isn't the kingdom Pilate's concerned about. So when Jesus says, for this I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. He says, I've got followers, right? We learned about it last week. We have sheep. He has sheep that follows him for one reason and one reason alone. They hear his what? They hear his voice. I've got followers. They hear my voice. It's just that they're not an army. They're not what you are worried about. Okay? What you are worried about. You say that I'm a king. Everyone who belongs to the what? Truth listens to my voice. Truth. Jesus is now going from earthly kings and kingdoms and armies and rule, okay? And he's now talking about what? Once he says truth, he's now talking about what? It's become spiritual now, hasn't it? It's become religious now. Truth. Truth. Pilate won't have any of us, okay? What was Pilate's answer? What is truth? Shut up, man. I am so sick of truth. Every day, people come to me to give me some version of what? Of the truth. You tell me about God, I tell you about gods. Pilate was a child of his time. So many conflicting views of truth. Rome had thousands of them. Dualism according to Plato. Humanism according to Socrates. Throw a rock, hit a philosopher. He's had it. I am only here to do what is legally correct. I care nothing about your what? About your truth. I don't need to mess with your religious convictions. Pilate sounds like somebody. Who does he sound like? Just about every person that we meet in America today who may not or be yet affiliated with Jesus. Amen? He sounds just like him, doesn't he? Haven't they told us they're sick of truth? You bet they have. Because again, what have we shown them we can do with the truth? We can fight over it real good, can't we? And there are a lot of pilots out there who've had it with the conflict. So the problem must be truth. That's the problem. He's sick of truth. So Pilate says, okay, what am I going to do about this? Okay, I'm not going to do anything because of the religious implications. So after he had said this, he went out to the Jews again. So he goes back out and he says what? I find no case against this guy. Okay, I don't have a legal reason to do what you want me to do. I have no case against him. So he comes up with a plan that maybe he can save face for both of them. In verse 39, he says, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Now what's interesting is there's a custom that Rome carries out for them. So this idea that he's not interested in religion at all, at least he's not interested personally, but he has an obligation as carrying out from Rome. Rome, when they took over, like I told you, they would allow you to practice your religion. You could be a good Jewish, spiritual Jew back then. You could be a good one. And since they allowed you to do that, they would protect you. They protected your right to worship. This is proof right here. Do they care about this living God that Israel confesses about? No, they've got tons back home, right? There's Parthenons and pantheons and temples and everything. They got tons of them back home. They don't care. But they will actually carry out a tradition, carry out a religious tradition for them. And one of the traditions was that you asked me to release a criminal. So who do you want me to release? The thief or who? Or the king of the Jews? Which one do you want me to release? See, they won't lose face with the people if they say, if Jesus was guilty, we chose to fulfill the custom of the Passover. So if he was guilty, they then can still be good Jews because they're fulfilling the custom of the Passover. Pilate saves face with the leaders because he doesn't have to compromise his principles of justice. He just said, I find no case against him. So from here on out, he believes that Jesus is what? Is innocent. But they do the one thing that he doesn't actually believe that they will do. What'd they say? They shouted in reply, not this man, but who? But Barabbas. Not this man, but Barabbas. And John adds, in case you guys want to know who Barabbas was, he was a what? He was a bandit. He was a thief. Some scripture would actually say, or actually apocryphal tales would say, that Barabbas actually was in prison in the first place for insurrection. I think even the Robe, the movie, has Barabbas as an insurrector, which, by the way, would guarantee that he'd be what? That he'd be crucified. But he's a thief. They'll release a convicted thief. They want Jesus dead, and they'll pay any price, but they'll do it gradually. Okay? We're going to release a convicted thief first. So this complicates matter for Pilate and for the Jewish leaders. They got to try something else now. Pilate realizes he's got to persuade them to his side or release Jesus in spite of them, or he chooses the first one. He tries to get some sympathy for him. And as we move into 19, the story becomes even darker. Where you can delight in what's happening. You could delight in Jesus' interactions with Pilate. He's already answered Pilate's question. He's told Pilate, this pagan Roman governor, that he actually is the Messiah. He told him that he is the king. Not of this world, but where? But of another one. So you can delight in that story, but you know this part is coming. And now it gets dark. Pilate then took Jesus and had him what? Had him scourged. Soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. Put a purple robe on him. Color of royalty, by the way. The emperor wore purple. And they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews," and to give him slaps in the face. Had him scourged. Why would he do that? Well, I can't read his mind, and nobody can, but one of the things that he could be thinking is that he wants to bring some sympathy for Jesus. Nothing else has worked. Not even coming right out and saying that he believed him to be innocent. They have dug in their heels. Nothing else has worked. So maybe this will bring him some sympathy. Scourging, you could argue, might even be worse than crucifixion itself. Scourging practices are very well documented. Very well documented. The movies don't get it right. It's a little whip, flagellum. It's a little whip about the size. It's a cat of nine tails of what you would think. And these leather thongs have, in exact increments apart, an iron ball bearing and either a sharpened bone or sharpened iron that would make a burr. Okay? And they were spaced exactly apart. And when the centurion would bring it down on the victim's back, the ball bearings would cause bruising, these huge hematomas. And then as he brought it down, he then would pull. And so the hematomas then would be opened up by these thorn-like burrs opened up, to where it would just nearly fillet people, the flesh off of them. So he had him scourged. Brings him back to him. And it says, Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns, the purple robe. Pilate then yells something here. He yells what? Behold the man. Behold the man, he says. So he brings him out in that condition. And now as completely humiliated as the one who said he was the king. Pilate didn't care that he was the king of the Jews. He didn't care that he was a king of a kingdom that Pilate had no jurisdiction over. And now he brings him out humiliated, hoping that the Jews will look and see and say, okay, he got what he deserved. Okay, and that's it. He got what he deserved. By the way, you read the prophecy about this. You could look at this as a fulfillment of prophecy. You read it earlier in church for our reading. He grew up like a young plant, like a dry root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him. Nothing in his appearance should we desire him. He was rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity, as one from whom others, what? Hide their faces. Because when somebody went through this, it hurt to look at them. You couldn't even look at them. He doesn't really look human anymore, which is why Pilate says, behold the what? It was a statement to be made. He doesn't even look human anymore. It hurts to look at him. No form to look at. We hide our faces from him. So it'd be awfully hard. Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and purple robe and said to them, behold the man. That cry may not have meant anything to Pilate, but it does to John, because when John hears it, he hears when it was said once before. When John the Baptist, as Jesus walked by, said, behold the Lamb of God. John used the same word as Pilate did when he said, behold the man. Like I said, I wonder if this has been going around in John's head for the past 70 years. The leaders don't respond with sympathy. In fact, they get more nasty. Okay? They get even nastier. When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted what? They begin to shout, crucify him. By the way, that's all Pilate's got left for him. There's nothing more. I either release him now, and maybe he won't die from this. Maybe I release him now, or there's only one other thing that can be done. And they know it now too, so now they're calling for it. Crucify him, they say, crucify him. Pilate says, you know what, take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him. He's saying, crucify him. What has he done? You see it in the other Gospels. I think in Luke, he says, crucify. What has he done? Take him yourselves. Do it. He's actually saying right now, you know what? Forget the law. Throw it out the window. You guys go do it. Sanhedrin knows that they can't. They can't. Because if they violate that part of the law, if they're the ones that hangs the corpse on the tree, then it doesn't fulfill. It doesn't work out. From now on, people then could say, well, you were the ones that hung him on the tree. You know, if I want to believe him as the Messiah, I don't believe he's cursed by God. You guys were the ones that hung him there. They can't do it. They know that they can't. Pilate's actually willing to allow them to violate that law. Forget the law. Take him yourselves. I can't go any further. I find no case against him. So it's getting crazy. It's a crazy scene. And the crazier it gets, the more that it works against Jesus. Because the louder that it gets, the more chaos that it gets. When they're beginning to threaten to what? See, he'll be held responsible for a riot. And again, that's the only one more thing that the emperor can use against him. So the longer this goes on, the harder it gets. And then they finally tell him, okay, they pull out all the stops. They says, let's bring the entire charge. Okay, I don't have verse 7 up there. Jews answered, we have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he claimed to be the Son of God. Uh-oh. You got to remember now where Pilate stands. Rome charged themselves with protecting the religions of the nations they occupied. Remember the occasion. There was occasion that history books say that he allowed a sacrilege to happen, and that was why the emperor had to step in. And we're not 100% sure what it is, but I can tell you that his name is mentioned 49 times in the Greek scriptures, in the New Testament, 49 times. All of them are within the narrative of the crucifixion except for one. There is one mention of Pilate's name back in Luke 13 where Jesus says, do you suppose that these Galileans were any worse than the ones whose Pilate mixed with their sacrifices? There was actually some Jews that Pilate actually killed while they were offering their sacrifices. That's not protecting the religion of Israel very well, is it? Maybe it was that one event that had happened. He claims to be the Son of God. If he doesn't do something about this, he could be found guilty of not protecting Israel's religion. That's all the emperor needs to remove him. Because he's kind of on probation for that anyway. He can't be seen letting sacrilege take place. And that's what they're telling you is happening. Sacrilege is taking place here. He claims to be the Son of who? Of God. Jewish leaders are starting to play dirty. They are finally around to blackmailing him. If Pilate goes against them, he'll pay a heavy price. So now he's scared. In fact, John said, when Pilate heard this, he was what? He was more afraid than ever, it says. The Son of God. Ancient times, some pagans believed their gods could become men. You remember when Paul healed a man in Lystra? The men that saw it, they all claimed that the gods have come down in what? In human form. And remember, they began to worship Paul and Barnabas. So Pilate might even be thinking, you know what? He might be God. And I just had him scourged. Then, of course, it happens. He entered his headquarters again, asked Jesus where he's from, but then Jesus finally decides to do what? He gives no answer. Okay? He gives no answer. Pilate's desperate now. He can't play the game anymore. He goes, come on, man, give me something. Give me something. Don't you know that I have the power? Don't refuse to speak to me now. Give me something. Okay, I'm desperate now. I'm desperate. Give me something to do. Do you not know I have the power to release you and to crucify you? Jesus opens his mouth one more time, just the last time, and he says, you would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a what? Is guilty of a greater sin. Wow. There's still something about this interchange, isn't there? Jesus is still being personable with him. It's almost like he's trying to comfort him. Don't worry, man. There's somebody who's committed a greater sin than you. Pilate may have sensed a bond, so he tries one more time. Pilate tries to what? He tries to release him. He redoubles his efforts. He could have released him on his own authority, but he's too vulnerable. and everything has just come together. It's conspired together to come together. Believers look at it and say it's a fulfillment of what? Okay? Everyone else looks and says everything's against him. It's just all come together. Everything is completely against him. Because the Jews cry out, if you what? You release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor. If the emperor's got to come again, he'll side with us this time, Pilate, and you know it. You know he'll side with us if the emperor has to come here again. Pilate realizes he either has to save himself or he has to save Jesus. So he sits down and tries to come up with a way to do neither and still save himself. Remember? He said, go ahead, crucify him. But I what? I wash my hands of this. But he takes control, and if you want to admire him as a politician, watch him right here. He takes control of the situation, shows how smart and skillful he really can be, all right? Because verse 13 says, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside, sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation day, it says. It was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about noon. He said to the Jews, here is your what? Here is your king. He's already passed judgment. All right, he's already passed judgment, but he understands that he might be able to get something more out of this. So actually what he's doing here is he's goading the people, isn't he? He's goading them. He's trying to get them to do something that he wants them to do. Here's your king, okay? Here is your king. And of course it works, because what do they say? Away with him, away with him. Crucify him, Pilate asked them. Shall I crucify your what? He's still goading him. Shall I crucify your king? Your king? And then they finally say it. We have no king, but bingo. Pilate just got what he wanted. They got nothing on him again, ever, right? He just got completely out from under him, because they just said they would rather have a pagan emperor, they would rather have a pagan dictator than they would their own king. And he's got it on record now. So it doesn't matter anymore. And now the nation of Israel will have to pay dearly for it. This is the beginning of the end right here. In 33 years, the temple will be destroyed. And in about 50 years after that, Israel will be crushed, and every Jew will be sent out into the diaspora. And they won't see the land again until 1948. Desire of Ages says that Caiaphas insisted earlier that it was good to sacrifice one man so the nation would not be destroyed. And now they're willing to sacrifice the whole nation to destroy the one man. They reject Jesus' kingship, such passionate hatred that they will now rejoice in a king they've always hated, the emperor. They just sold their souls. They wanted Messiah to be King David. They wanted him to be a conqueror. And this little rabbi from Galilee just didn't fit the bill. Just didn't fit the bill. Now, even if David were to be resurrected and show up as the Messiah, these guys would have to reject him, because they've got no king but who? Even if David showed up to lead them again, they'd have to say, sorry, David, we have no king but the emperor. Pilate gives him a preview, by the way. He says, go ahead and crucify him, and let me label this. So he does it in Greek and Aramaic and Latin. Greek, Aramaic, and Latin. The language of the East, the language of the West, and the legal language of Rome itself. Here is what? The King of the Jews. They balk at it. Don't write that. Don't write the King of the Jews. But this man said that I am the King of the Jews. Pilate says, what I've written, I've written. You guys, get out of my face. You got nothing on me anymore. Completely, absolutely unmoved. So I think about this verse, I think about the prophecy. He opened not his mouth, except that when he did open his mouth. Pilate was taken enough by him to ask him the one thing that Pilate never would ask. He's not going to mess with one of these rabbis who claims to be, the king of heaven or claims to be the son of God. He's not going to mess with him. What got him to ask Jesus that question? What got him to stand and listen long enough? I argue that it was Jesus himself, that Jesus closed his mouth when he needed to, and he opened his mouth when he needed to. And when he did, he created a relationship with Pilate that think about this. Are we going to ever be able to look upon Pilate or anybody who's oppressing us the way that Pilate represents Rome back then? Are we going to, if we live through this end time part, are we ever going to be able to look upon them as lambs the same way as the man born blind and the Samaritan woman by the well? Jesus does. Think of how we feel about leaders who haven't even persecuted us today, that we happen to disagree with. How we feel about them, what it draws up inside of us. Jesus is able to look at this man who is going to sentence him to death and treat him the same way that he treated the woman at the well, the same way that he treated the man born blind. He kept his mouth shut when he needed to. Notice, he doesn't argue with him, does he? Is Jesus more powerful than Pilate? Is Jesus more powerful than the emperor? He doesn't even threaten them, does he? Doesn't even point them out. As close as he comes, he says, you wouldn't have any power unless my Father didn't give it to you. You wouldn't have any power. That's as close as he comes. He doesn't threaten them. And sometimes I always love what Morris Venden said, that somewhere in the middle of this, if it had been me, if I was the one that was called upon to be your Messiah, I'm sorry, guys, you're not being resurrected to anything. Because about in the middle of that, about the fourth slap across my face, I would say, you know what? It's about time they saw who they were messing with. Jesus does none of that. He knows that if he says anything to Pilate about his power, and even threaten him with the second coming, threaten him with one day to come, what will happen to him if you don't believe? He could have done that, couldn't he? But he knows what will happen to Pilate when he does. What happens to a man of power? What happens to somebody of strength when you threaten them with greater strength and more? He'd have lost Pilate completely, wouldn't he? Because the thing is that what I see in this conversation with him is amazing. He wants Pilate saved. And the effort that he's already put into him, that careful conversation that he had with him, setting aside everything, setting aside his own personal safety, setting aside all of that, the pain he has to be in right now. And he's able still to look this man in the eye and see him as a lost sheep, as lost as the man born blind, as lost as the woman at the well, but arguably one of the 10 most powerful men in all the world. He sees him the same. Wow. He comforts him. He shuts up when he could really nail him, really put him down. And you forget, too, he's already done more, seemingly, with trying to reach Pilate than he's done with a lot of people. He gave his wife a dream the night before. God has been working with Pilate for a couple of days now. So who knows? I would not be shocked if we get to the kingdom and Pilate is there. I would not be shocked. And by the way, if he is, we better be good with it. Not much of a choice. You're not going to go to God and say, you know what, I don't like that Mike's here, okay? You got to do something about this. I would not be shocked, all because of how Jesus handled him that day, on the very day that Jesus was crucified by him. The ones who handed you over to me, they're guilty of a greater sin. I never saw those words as comforting as they really are. Man. Our good shepherd, always able to do what there is absolutely no way we are able to do. That's why we need him. That's why we need a Savior. The Messiah, the anointed one. Cursed and anointed. Cursed and blessed. Just real quick, I think that that's what Paul was struggling with for 3 days after he saw Jesus on the throne. He laid there thinking, I know that he was crucified. How can he be blessed by God and cursed by God? So I really believe that God kept him blind for 3 days so he could struggle with that, so that he could mess with that, so he could just come to terms with it. And then finally one day Paul got it. He said, wait a minute, the curse was for me. He was cursed for me. And he gave me his anointing. When that happened, the scales fell away from Paul's eyes. Ananias shows up at the door. And Paul says, you know what? From this day forward, I claim to know nothing but Christ Jesus and him crucified.